It was a cold, moonless night when I found myself driving home from my cousin's house. She lived in a remote area, about an hour and a half from the city, surrounded by dense woods and sprawling farmland. The kind of place where the nearest gas station was a 20-minute drive, and the only sound at night were the rustling of leaves and the occasional howl of a distant coyote. I had stayed later than I intended, catching up over coffee and old family stories, but now it was pushing 1:30 a.m., and I was exhausted. The thought of calling off work the next day crossed my mind, but I knew I couldn't afford to. So I grabbed my keys, said my goodbyes, and headed out into the darkness. The drive started off uneventful. The roads were empty, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the inky blackness. I had the radio on low, some old rock station playing softly in the background, but it wasn't enough to keep me fully awake. My eyelids felt heavy, and I had to keep shaking my head to stay alert. The landscape blurred by endless fields, shadowy trees, and the occasional farmhouse set far back from the road. It was peaceful in a way, but also eerily isolating. About 20 minutes into the drive, something caught my eye. My headlights illuminated an object in the middle of the road, and I slammed on the brakes, coming to a stop just a few feet away. My heart raced as I squinted through the windshield. It was a suitcase, a large, upright suitcase, standing perfectly in the center of the lane. It looked brand new, untouched, as if someone had just placed it there moments ago. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my tired brain struggling to make sense of the situation. Who would leave a suitcase in the middle of the road? Had it fallen out of a car? But why was it standing upright like that? I glanced around, but there was no one in sight. No cars, no houses, just the endless stretch of farmland. I considered getting out to move it, but something about the situation felt off. Instead, I eased my car into the oncoming lane and drove around it, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror as the suitcase disappeared into the darkness behind me. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe it had just fallen off a truck and landed that way. But the image of that suitcase stayed with me, nagging at the back of my mind. I kept driving, the road stretching on endlessly, the fields and trees blending into a monotonous blur. Then, about 10 minutes later, I saw it again, another object in the road. This time it was a truck, an old beat-up pickup parked right in the middle of my lane. Its lights were off, and there was no sign of movement inside. I slowed to stop behind it, my pulse quickening. I honked a few times, but there was no response. The truck just sat there, silent and still. I waited for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The truck looked like it had seen better days. Dents and scratches marred its sides, and the paint was faded and peeling. But what really unnerved me was the fact that I couldn't see anyone inside. The windows were dark, and there was no silhouette of a driver or passenger. It was as if the truck had been abandoned. I didn't want to stay there any longer than I had to. I carefully maneuvered around the truck, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder as I passed. As I pulled back onto the road, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The truck was still there, a dark, hulking shape in the middle of the road. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Why would someone leave their truck like that? And where were they now? I drove on, my nerves on edge. The suitcase and the truck, were they connected? Or was it just a bizarre coincidence? I didn't have time to dwell on it, though, because a few minutes later, I was forced to stop again. This time it was a person. A man stood in the middle of the road, waving his arms frantically. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with messy hair and a disheveled appearance. His clothes were torn, and I could see cuts and bruises on his arms and face. He looked like he'd been through hell. I slowed to a stop, my heart pounding, and he immediately rushed to my window. "Hey, did you see a truck back there?" he asked, his voice urgent. I nodded, too stunned to speak. "Think you'd give me a ride back to it?" he said, his eyes darting around nervously. I hesitated. Something about this didn't feel right. "Why is your truck parked in the middle of the road?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He stumbled over his words, his story not quite adding up. "I ran out of gas," he said finally. "I was trying to walk to a gas station, but it's too far. I need to get back to my truck." I frowned. If he ran out of gas, why would he want to ride back to the truck? Wouldn't he want to go to the gas station? Before I could respond, my eyes caught something in the distance, just beyond the man. There, partially hidden in the tall crops by the side of the road, was the glint of metal. It looked like the tail end of a car deep in the field. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I rolled up my window, and the man's expression changed instantly. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of rage. He started yelling, pounding on the glass with his fists. I hit the gas, my tires screeching, as I sped away. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the road, his figure growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared into the darkness. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone. I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but by the time they arrived, the truck was gone. The car in the field, however, was still there, and what they found inside was horrifying. The driver was dead, not from a crash, but from something far more sinister. It seemed they had picked up a hitchhiker, and it had cost them their life. The police speculated that the suitcase and the truck were part of some twisted scheme to lure people in, to get them to stop and offer help. But the man I'd encountered, the one who tried to get into my car, was never found. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted. All I know is that I was lucky to get away. I'm a long-haul trucker, and I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road. But nothing quite prepared me for what happened that winter night. It was around the holidays, and I was making a delivery 2 states away. The roads were icy and the snow was coming down hard, but I'd driven in worse conditions before. I left town at 6 p.m., and by 11 o'clock, I was ready for a break. I pulled into a small truck stop on the side of the highway, just to use the bathroom and grab a coffee. The parking lot was mostly empty, with only a couple of other trucks scattered around. I went inside, did my business, and came back out with a steaming cup of coffee. I climbed into the cab of my truck, savoring the warmth of the drink and the quiet of the night. As I sat there, I noticed someone standing at the back of the building. The lights were dim, but I could make out the figure of a man leaning against the wall, staring in my direction. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. I tried to ignore him, focusing on my coffee and the road ahead. But every time I glanced back, he was still there, still watching. It made me uneasy. I finished my coffee, started up the truck, and pulled out of the parking lot, eager to put some distance between me and that strange man. The roads were empty, and the snow was falling steadily. About 30 minutes into the drive, I noticed something in my side mirror, a quick glint of light, like a reflection. I checked my mirrors, but there was nothing behind me. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a trick of the light, or maybe a broken reflector on the road. But then it happened again. This time, I caught a glimpse of a car, a dark sedan, right behind my trailer. It was so close that I could barely see in my mirrors, and its headlights were off. My stomach churned. Who would be driving that close in this weather, with no lights on? I merged into the other lane, hoping to lose them, but the car followed. I merged back, and they stayed with me, tailgating me relentlessly. Finally, after a few tense minutes, they slowed down and disappeared into the darkness behind me. I drove on, my nerves frayed. Around 3 a.m., I pulled off at a rest stop to get some sleep. It was just a small cutaway off the road, big enough for a couple of trucks. I parked, cut the engine, and leaned my seat back, closing my eyes. The snow was falling softly, and the sound of the wind was soothing. I drifted off quickly. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up suddenly, my heart racing. I opened my eyes and froze. There outside my window was a face, a man with wide, unblinking eyes, staring right at me. I jerked back, nearly falling out of my seat, but the man didn't move. He just stood there, his face pressed against the glass, watching me. I fumbled for the radio, calling for help. As I did, I heard footsteps crunching in the snow, and a car sped away from behind my truck. It was the same dark sedan that had been following me earlier. The police arrived soon after, but the man and the car were gone. They asked me to go over everything that had happened, and as I did, I remembered the man at the truck stop. Had he been following me this whole time? What did he want? I never found out, but I'll never forget those eyes staring at me through the window in the dead of night. I was 16 when I got my first job at a pizza place. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me some spending money and a sense of independence. I'd saved up enough to buy a cheap car, and I was eager to start doing deliveries instead of working inside the shop. It was a regular weeknight, and I was scheduled until 10:30. The first few hours were busy, but by 8 o'clock, things had slowed down. At 9 o'clock, I got an online order for 2 medium pizzas to be delivered to a neighborhood about 10 minutes away. I grabbed the pizzas, hopped in my car, and headed out. The roads were quiet, with only a few cars here and there. But as I got closer to the neighborhood, a car pulled out from a side street and started following me. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe they were just going the same way. But when I turned into the neighborhood, they turned too. That's when I started to feel uneasy. The neighborhood was small, with houses spread out along a wooded road. I found the address and turned into the driveway, my headlights illuminating a mailbox with the right number. I parked, grabbed the pizzas, and walked up to the door. I knocked, but no one answered. After a minute, a light came on inside, and a woman in her early 30s opened the door. She looked tired and annoyed. "I didn't order any pizza," she said, her voice sharp. I apologized, feeling confused, and walked back to my car. As I did, I noticed the car that had been following me was now parked behind mine, blocking the driveway. My heart sank. I got in my car and tried to turn around, but there wasn't enough space. I ended up skidding off the driveway and hitting a tree. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I jumped out of the car and ran into the woods, hearing footsteps behind me. I didn't stop until I was sure I was safe. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the car and the men were gone. My car was never recovered. The police later told me that the order had been a setup, a way to lure me to that house. What those men planned to do, I'll never know. But I do know that I was lucky to get away.